Welcome back to WEGS Garage. Ever since we first started our 1964 Triumph TR4 project car, well, probably almost 2 years ago now, which is crazy, our awesome WEGS Garage viewers have always known that something is up with this engine. We've spent a lot of time trying to diagnose different issues, overheating, carburetor tuning, timing, things like that. But we think there might just be something a little bit deeper going on inside this lump of steel, and today we are going to figure it out. So stay tuned. Alright, so our first test today is going to be the dry compression test on all 4 cylinders here. We've got the spark plug on cylinder 1 out there, ready to go. Distributor is disconnected from the ignition coil. And over here, of course, we have our Harbor Freight Pittsburgh compression test kit. So we're just going to stick that in to each cylinder, one after another. Crank it over, see what kind of numbers we get.
Okay, ready when you are.
Alright, well, let's take a look at these dry numbers. Here on cylinder 1 and 2, we actually have the same value, 135, 135, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not great, but it's not terrible. Now, let's move to cylinder 3 and 4. And here we start to see where we might have a problem. In fact, we definitely have some sort of problem here. There's only 15 and 3, 35 and 4. So that could definitely indicate something's wrong here. Now, before we jump to too many conclusions, we are going to do the wet test. And here's how that works. All right, so the wet test is pretty much exactly the same as the dry compression test, except for we're going to squirt just a little bit of oil in the cylinder before we do the test. Now, what that kind of does is it can give you an idea if the problem with the compression comes from the bottom end of the engine or the top end of the engine. In other words, if there's a problem with a ring sealing, that oil will kind of seal around the cylinder wall and help give a higher compression number. Whereas if it was a problem with the top, the compression number is probably not going to change a whole lot. So we can kind of look at the difference between the two numbers on each cylinder and infer possibly what is the problem. I say possibly because nothing's like definitive, but it can just kind of tell you a lot about what's going on. Alright, so here we are, wet test results, and we'll talk a little bit about what they mean. So a little bit higher on 1 and 2, a little bit higher on 3 and 4. If you put oil in the cylinder, it's super duper normal for it to increase the compression. That's because it helps the rings seal against the cylinder walls. So we would expect these numbers to be higher than this. How much higher is right? That's pretty much impossible to determine just off of one test. But what we're seeing here and what we can kind of conclude from this is that there isn't a huge difference between the two numbers, right? It does increase it slightly, but I don't think it's anything that's indicating that like there's a major problem with the rings or the sealing of the piston against the cylinder walls. All right, so what is that telling us? So these cars between cylinders 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, the head gasket gets very, very thin. So honestly, starts to look an awful lot like maybe we got a problem with the head gasket here, which isn't like the end of the world. I mean, it'll take some work to replace that. But we are going to try just one more thing, and that is that this engine came to us. We have no idea the history of it or what kind of maintenance has been done on it recently. So we want to check the valve clearances, which is a procedure that has to be done pretty regularly on these cars. They have the adjustable rocker arms. So we are going to do that now, because if one of the valves is not closing completely because the clearances aren't right, that would definitely cause an issue with compression. So we're going to just do that. It's an easy enough thing to do. We're going to do that before we do anything drastic, like taking the head off. All right, so things are escalating pretty quickly here in WEGS Garage. We checked the valve clearances, and they're really not too bad. The important thing is there is some clearance. They're a little bit under, but there is some clearance between the rocker arm and the top of the valve. So that tells us that the valves are closing all the way. So that's not what's causing our bad compression. So basically what we're going to do now is take the head off, because any other problem we might be able to diagnose, but it really doesn't matter because the fix is going to require taking the head off. So this is going to be fun. Let's take the head off. All right, quick update on where we're at here. We have the radiator drained, the thermostat housing is removed, everything's pretty much removed from the cylinder head, I think, that needs to come off. We decided to try to just leave the carburetors and manifolds here just kind of pulled back away from the engine a little bit, and hopefully that'll be good enough to get the head off. So next step's going to be taking out all these, I believe there's 10 head stud bolts, and then let the fun begin trying to remove the head. Here's our sad cylinder head. All of the nuts are off the studs. This stud actually came out, which is, that's okay. So now it's time to try to actually take the head off, which is supposed to be a little bit tricky, kind of gets stuck on there. So we're gonna very carefully using no metal tools, sort of tap around it and try and get it loose. And then don't at me. I know, once we take that off, it's very important not to let the cylinders, liners move, not to move the crankshaft, to keep everything nice and tight in there because you do not want the cylinder liners to come out. So, first step though, we gotta get that head off. All right, well, there it is. The engine compartment is now in a very sad state. We were able to remove the cylinder head. Wasn't too bad. We tapped around, we did pry a little bit between this and the thermostat housing, just a little bit to get it up, and eventually got it loose enough to where we could pull it up and get it off of here. So, as you can see, the head gasket actually went with the head on this, so it's not here. Everything here looks okay-ish. Not as much sludge as I've heard can get back in the cylinders back here, but we could probably still flush these waterways out a little bit. You can see the cylinder liners here, which are a separate piece from the block, so very important not to disturb these while we have the head off the car. Because there's another seal on the bottom of those, and if we break that seal, well, then we're in for even more work than we're in for now. And let's go check out what kind of work we're in for over here. There's our cylinder head on the bench. Looks pretty good. Now, initial assessment here, you can see the head gasket here. These were the cylinders we were concerned with. You can see it doesn't really appear as though there is an issue with that. Otherwise, you would see some like scorching or something here that would indicate that gases were kind of moving between the two. Not really seeing that here. So actually, I think we had a good head gasket. So you might be wondering, what's wrong with this head? Well, that wasn't that hard to find. Let's take a look at those exhaust valves. Here is cylinder 4 exhaust valve. And if you see anything out of place there, what you should notice is right there. This is what's called a burn valve. That is not sealing against the surface. It's burnt up, the material's missing. That's our problem there. Cylinder 3 has probably even worse burnt valve. So that's the problem. There's our culprit. The other two actually look pretty good. I do think it's common for these engines, if they are going to burn a valve or have issues, it's going to be on the back part of the block because it's the furthest point for the cooling system. Generally runs the hottest of the whole engine. So there it is. Hey, well, we figured out the problem.
Now we gotta fix it.
Maybe. Yeah, I think we should have a beer first.
Yeah, we got a few things to do here.
All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Kind of a fun-filled day, huh? You know, I've gotten a lot of questions like, hey, Mark, what happens when you finish the car? Is there still going to be a WEGS garage? And, you know, I still don't really have an answer for that, but I guess this should answer it at least for a little bit longer. But the truth is, we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep working on this thing until it's done and until it runs right. And I am really excited to finally have found the problem with our engine and finally be able to get this thing running right so we can go have some fun in this car, because it is going to be a lot of fun. So stick around. We got some valve work to do, some cylinder head stuff, some new territory. We're gonna figure it out here on WEGS Garage. We'll see you next time.